The sun was just beginning to rise over Los Angeles International Airport, casting a golden glow across the tarmac. The air buzzed with the usual morning chaos, suitcases rolling, announcements echoing through the terminals, and passengers rushing to their gates. Among them was Keanu Reeves, stepping out of a black car that had dropped him off at the curb. Dressed in his signature casual style, a pair of well-worn jeans, a plain white t-shirt, and a leather jacket, he looked like any other traveler, except for the faint glimmer of recognition in the eyes of those who passed by. His dark hair was slightly tousled from the breeze, and he carried only a small carry-on bag slung over his shoulder. Keanu wasn't traveling alone. Around his neck hung a delicate silver necklace, its design simple yet meaningful. It wasn't flashy or expensive-looking, but it seemed to hold a special place in his heart. He reached up absently to touch it as he walked, almost as if reassuring himself it was still there. To anyone else, it might have looked like an ordinary piece of jewelry, but to Keanu it was a treasure beyond measure. It had been a gift from someone very close to him, his late sister. She had given it to him years ago during a time when life felt simpler and family ties were everything. Now it served as both a reminder of her love and a symbol of resilience. As Keanu made his way through the bustling terminal, he attracted subtle attention. A group of teenagers whispered excitedly among themselves before one mustered the courage to ask for a selfie. Keanu obliged with a warm smile, posing patiently despite the early hour. Nearby, a businesswoman glanced up from her phone, double-checking to see if it really was him. But for the most part, people left him alone, respecting his quiet demeanor. He wasn't the type to demand attention or expect special treatment, even though his fame could easily command it. That humility was part of what made him so beloved. After clearing security, Keanu boarded the plane bound for New York City. This wasn't just any flight. It was a first-class journey reserved for those accustomed to luxury. As he stepped onto the aircraft, he nodded politely to the flight attendants greeting passengers at the door. One of them, a young woman named Sarah, watched him take his seat near the window. She had heard rumors about celebrities flying this route before, but seeing Keanu in person was different. There was something disarmingly normal about him, despite the aura of stardom that clung to his name. Sarah was relatively new to the job, eager to prove herself in the competitive world of aviation. With neatly styled hair and a crisp uniform, she prided herself on delivering impeccable service. Yet, as she began assisting passengers with their bags and offering refreshments, her gaze kept drifting back to Keanu. At first, it was curiosity. What was someone like him doing on this flight? Was he heading to another movie set, meeting friends, or simply escaping the constant spotlight? For a while, her thoughts spiraled until they landed on something unexpected: the necklace. It wasn't hard to notice. The chain gleamed faintly under the soft cabin lights, catching her eye whenever Keanu moved. Compared to the Rolex watches and diamond rings adorning other first-class travelers, it seemed almost underwhelming. Sarah's brow furrowed slightly as she considered it. Why would someone like Keanu wear something so plain? Surely he could afford something more extravagant, something befitting his status. The thought nagged at her, planting a seed of judgment that she couldn't quite shake. Meanwhile, Keanu settled into his seat, blissfully unaware of the scrutiny. He pulled out a book from his carry-on, flipping it open to a dog-eared page. Reading had always been his escape, a way to disconnect from the noise of Hollywood and reconnect with himself. Occasionally, he'd glance out the window, watching ground crew members scurry about below. His mind wandered to memories tied to the necklace, moments spent laughing with his sister, sharing dreams and secrets. Those memories were bittersweet now, but they anchored him in ways nothing else could. Back in the galley, Sarah prepared for the pre-flight safety demonstration, her thoughts still lingering on Keanu. She told herself she shouldn't care about what he wore. After all, it wasn't her place to judge. But the contrast between his humble accessory and the opulence surrounding him gnawed at her. By the time she returned to the cabin to offer complimentary drinks, her internal conflict had grown louder. When she finally reached Keanu's row, she hesitated for a moment, torn between professionalism and the urge to say something. "Would you like anything to drink?" she asked, forcing a polite smile. Keanu looked up, his expression calm and friendly. "Just water, please," he replied, his voice soft but steady. Sarah handed him the bottle, then froze. Before she could stop herself, the words tumbled out. "Is that really appropriate for first class? Shouldn't you have upgraded your jewelry along with your ticket?" The second the sentence left her lips, she regretted it. Her cheeks burned as silence fell between them, heavy and awkward. Keanu stared at her for a moment, clearly taken, aback but not visibly upset. Then, with a quiet dignity that seemed to fill the entire cabin, he responded, "This necklace means a lot to me." His tone wasn't defensive or angry. It was gentle, almost forgiving. Passengers nearby stopped, pretending to read or scroll through their phones, turning their heads to watch the exchange unfold. Sarah felt every pair of eyes boring into her, judging not Keanu but her own behavior. For the first time since starting her career as a flight attendant, she wished the ground would swallow her whole. Instead of lingering, she mumbled a hurried, "Enjoy your flight," and retreated to the galley, her face flushed with shame. Inside, she replayed the moment over and over, cringing at how unprofessional she'd been. What had possessed her to say such a thing? And why had she let jealousy, or whatever it was, get the better of her? As the plane taxied down the runway, Sarah resolved to figure out a way to make things right. But for now, she could only hope that Keanu wouldn't hold her comment against her. In his seat, Keanu leaned back against the cushion, closing his eyes for a brief moment. He wasn't angry or offended by Sarah's remark. Instead, he felt a pang of sadness for her. People often misunderstood simplicity, mistaking it for a lack of value. To him, the necklace represented far more than its appearance. It was a connection to his past, a source of strength, and a reminder of love that transcended material wealth. As the plane lifted off the ground, soaring higher, into the sky, Keanu held on to that thought, letting it carry him forward. The plane climbed higher into the sky, leaving behind the sprawling cityscape of Los Angeles. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, blending with the occasional rustle of passengers adjusting their seats or flipping through magazines. Keanu sat quietly by the window, his fingers absently tracing the edge of the silver necklace around his neck. He wasn't thinking about Sarah's comment anymore, at least not in a way that made him angry or hurt. Instead, his mind drifted to memories of his sister, the person who had given him the necklace years ago. She had been more than just family. She was his confidant, his cheerleader, and sometimes even his voice of reason. They shared countless moments together. Long talks late into the night, laughter over inside jokes, and quiet evenings spent watching old movies. When she passed away, it felt like a part of him had gone with her. But this necklace remained, a tangible piece of her presence that he carried everywhere. It didn't matter if it looked plain compared to other people's jewelry. It held a weight far greater than gold or diamonds ever could. As the flight leveled off, Keanu opened his book again, trying to lose himself in its pages. Yet every few minutes he'd glance up, catching glimpses of Sarah moving through the cabin. She seemed flustered, her movements sharper than before, and her usual smile was noticeably absent. Passengers whispered among themselves, some casting curious glances toward Keanu's row. Word of the awkward exchange had spread quickly, though no one dared approach him directly. Keanu noticed but chose not to dwell on it. He understood that everyone made mistakes, even strangers thrust into uncomfortable situations. In the galley, Sarah struggled to focus on her duties. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee into delicate porcelain cups, spilling a few drops onto the tray. Another flight attendant raised an eyebrow but said nothing, sensing that something was wrong. Sarah couldn't stop replaying the incident in her head. Why had she said those words? What had possessed her to judge someone she didn't even know? The more she thought about it, the worse she felt. Here was Keanu Reeves, a man known for his kindness, humility, and generosity, and she had treated him like he was somehow less because of a necklace. Her frustration turned inward, manifesting as a mix of embarrassment and self-loathing. She remembered reading stories about Keanu, how he once gave up his seat on a train so a woman could sit with her child, how he quietly donated money to cancer research after losing loved ones to the disease, and how he often went out of his way to make fans feel seen and appreciated. Those acts of kindness were the opposite of what she had done today. Instead of treating him with respect, she had let her own insecurities cloud her judgment. Now she feared she might have ruined his flight, or worse, damaged his perception of her forever. Determined to pull herself together, Sarah forced a smile and resumed her rounds, offering snacks and drinks to passengers. Each interaction felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of her earlier mistake followed her down the aisle. When she reached Keanu's row again, she hesitated, unsure whether to acknowledge what had happened or pretend it never occurred. For a brief moment their eyes met, and Sarah saw something unexpected. Not anger or resentment, but understanding. It was as if he knew she hadn't meant harm, even though her words had stung. That small spark of compassion only deepened her guilt. Back in the galley, Sarah leaned against the counter, taking a shaky breath. She needed to do something, anything, to make amends. Ignoring the situation wouldn't fix it, and letting the flight end without addressing her behavior would haunt her long after they landed. But how could she apologize without making things worse? Would Keanu even want to hear from her again? These questions swirled in her mind, paralyzing her with doubt. Still, she knew she couldn't stay frozen in indecision. If there was one thing she prided herself on, it was owning up to her mistakes. Meanwhile, Keanu continued reading, though his thoughts kept drifting back to Sarah. He didn't hold a grudge against her. In fact, he barely thought of her comment at all. People judged others all the time, often without realizing it. Sometimes it came from insecurity. Other times it stemmed from ignorance. Whatever the reason, Keanu believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. He imagined Sarah must be feeling terrible right now, replaying the moment over and over in her head. If anything, he felt sorry for her. As the hours passed, the cabin grew quieter. Some passengers dozed off, lulled by the steady hum of the engines, while others watched movies on their screens. Keanu closed his book and stared out the window, watching clouds drift lazily below. The necklace lay against his chest, catching the soft glow of the overhead light. Its simplicity reminded him of life's most important truths. That value isn't determined by appearances, and that love endures beyond material possessions. These thoughts brought him peace, grounding him in a world where superficial judgments often ruled. Sarah, meanwhile, wrestled with her decision. She knew apologizing wouldn't undo what she had said, but it might ease the tension for both of them. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her uniform and stepped back into the aisle. Her heart pounded as she approached Keanu's row, each step feeling heavier than the last. When she finally stood beside him, she cleared her throat, softly drawing his attention. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you mind if I speak with you for a moment?" Keanu looked up, his expression calm and open. "Of course," he replied, setting his book aside. Sarah swallowed hard, gathering her courage. "I wanted to apologize for what I said earlier," she began, her words rushing out in a nervous stream. "It was unprofessional and rude, and I truly regret it. You didn't deserve that." Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the depth of her remorse. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy and uncertain. Then Keanu smiled, a kind, forgiving smile that instantly put Sarah at ease. "It's okay," he said simply. "We all say things we don't mean sometimes. Thank you for apologizing." His response caught her off guard. She had expected anger or dismissal, not compassion. Tears welled up in her eyes, though she blinked them away quickly, unwilling to cry in front of him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll leave you to your book now." With that, she turned and walked away, her steps lighter than before. For the rest of the flight, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted subtly. Passengers who had overheard the apology exchanged knowing looks, some nodding approvingly. Sarah returned to her duties with renewed focus, her earlier anxiety replaced by gratitude. Keanu, too, seemed unaffected, resuming his reading as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet the ripple effects of the encounter lingered, reminding everyone on board of the power of forgiveness and the importance of looking beyond surface-level judgments. As the flight continued its journey across the country, the tension that had once filled the cabin began to ease. Passengers settled back into their routines. Some slept, others watched movies, and a few flipped through magazines or worked on laptops. The soft hum of conversation blended with the steady drone of the engines, creating a comforting rhythm. Yet for Sarah, the apology she had offered Keanu lingered in her mind like an echo. It wasn't just about saying sorry, it was about what came next. She couldn't undo her words, but she could try to learn from them. Back in the galley, Sarah busied herself with refilling drink carts and organizing snacks. Her movements deliberate and focused, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Keanu's calm response. His kindness had been unexpected, almost disarming. She had braced herself for anger or dismissal, but instead, he had met her with understanding. That moment stuck with her, replaying over and over in her head. Why had he been so forgiving? What kind of person could let go of judgment so easily? The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much she still had to learn. Not just about being a better flight attendant, but about being a better person. While Sarah grappled with her reflections, Keanu remained seated by the window, his book open in his lap. He wasn't reading anymore, though. Instead, he stared out at the endless expanse of clouds, lost in thought. The necklace around his neck caught the light occasionally, a quiet reminder of why he didn't need to carry resentment. Life was too short for grudges, especially over something as small as a careless comment. Still, he understood where Sarah's words had come from. People often judged based on appearances because it was easier than looking deeper. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it explained it, and understanding was the first step toward forgiveness. For the rest of the flight, Sarah made a conscious effort to treat every passenger with extra care. She smiled warmly, offered help, without hesitation, and listened attentively when someone spoke. Her earlier mistake had shaken her confidence, but it also pushed her to do better. When she passed Keanu's row again, she nodded politely, careful not to disturb him. To her relief, he gave her a slight nod in return, his expression neutral but not unfriendly. That small gesture meant more to her than she could put into words. It was a sign that he truly accepted her apology, and maybe even forgave her. As the plane cruised closer to New York, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the clouds below. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, signaling the approach of evening. Passengers stirred, stretching their legs or checking their watches. Some began gathering their belongings, anticipating the landing ahead. Sarah took this opportunity to make one final round, ensuring everyone had everything they needed before descent. When she reached Keanu's seat, she paused briefly, unsure whether to say anything else. In the end, she simply smiled and said, "We'll be landing soon. Let me know if you need anything." Keanu looked up and returned her smile. "Thank you," he said softly. His tone was warm, almost reassuring, as if to remind her that all was well between them. Sarah felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. For the first time since the incident, she allowed herself to breathe fully, letting go of the tight knot of guilt that had been weighing her down. She finished her rounds and returned to the galley, feeling lighter than she had in hours. In the final stretch of the flight, Keanu closed his book for good and tucked it back into his carry-on bag. He glanced at the necklace one last time, running his fingers over its smooth surface. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a story, a memory, a lifeline to the past. He thought about how easy it would have been to react angrily to Sarah's comment, to shut her down or demand an explanation. But what good would that have done? Holding on to anger only hurt the person carrying it. By choosing forgiveness, he had given both himself and Sarah a chance to move forward. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their descent into New York City. Passengers buckled their seatbelts and peered out the windows, eager to catch a glimpse of the skyline bathed in the golden glow of sunset. The city stretched out below, a patchwork of lights and towering buildings. Keanu leaned closer to the window, taking in the view. Despite his fame, He never grew tired of seeing new places or revisiting old ones. There was always something magical about arriving somewhere new, even if it was just for a short visit. Sarah stood near the exit door, preparing for the flurry of activity that came with disembarking. Her heart raced slightly as she imagined Keanu walking past her on his way off the plane. Would he say anything? Would he acknowledge her at all? Part of her hoped he wouldn't. After all, she had already apologized, and prolonging the interaction might only make things awkward. But another part of her wanted to hear him say goodbye, to confirm that there were no hard feelings left behind. When the plane finally touched down and taxied to the gate, the cabin erupted into movement. Passengers unfastened their seatbelts, retrieved their bags from the overhead compartments, and lined up in the aisle, ready to leave. Keanu waited patiently for his turn, standing quietly as the line shuffled forward. When he reached the front of the plane, he paused for a moment, turning to look at Sarah. Their eyes met, and without saying a word, he gave her a small wave, a gesture so simple yet so meaningful. It was his way of saying, "It's okay. You're forgiven." Sarah watched as he stepped off the plane, disappearing into the crowd beyond the jet bridge. Her chest tightened with emotion, but it wasn't sadness this time. It was gratitude. Gratitude for the lesson she had learned, for the kindness Keanu had shown her, and for the reminder that people are more than what they wear or how they look. As the last of the passengers filed out, she took a deep breath, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. This flight may have started with a mistake, but it ended with growth, and sometimes that's all anyone can hope for. As the last passenger stepped off the plane, Sarah stood by the exit door, watching the bustling activity in the terminal. The rush of travelers dragging suitcases and scanning for loved ones created a chaotic, yet familiar scene. She felt a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity, as if the weight of her earlier mistake had finally lifted, leaving behind a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. Her hands trembled slightly as she began tidying up the cabin, picking up discarded wrappers and straightening seatbelts. Each small task gave her time to process everything that had happened. In the quiet moments between cleaning rows, Sarah replayed Keanu's final gesture, the simple wave that said more than words ever could. It wasn't just an acknowledgement, it was a gift. He had chosen to forgive her completely, without hesitation or resentment. That act of grace stayed with her, lingering like sunlight on a cloudy day. She realized now how easy it would have been for him to hold on to anger or dismiss her apology. Instead, he had shown her kindness when she least deserved it. That realization hit her deeply, stirring emotions she hadn't expected. Meanwhile, Keanu made his way through the crowded terminal, blending seamlessly into the sea of people despite his fame. His carry-on bag hung loosely over one shoulder, and the silver necklace still rested against his chest, catching faint glimmers of light from the overhead fixtures. He moved with purpose but without hurry, occasionally nodding politely to those who recognized him. For most celebrities, being stopped for autographs or photos might feel intrusive, but Keanu welcomed these interactions. They reminded him of the connections that mattered, moments shared with strangers, however brief. Outside the terminal, the city buzzed with energy. Yellow cabs honked impatiently, weaving through traffic, while pedestrians hurried along sidewalks lined with towering skyscrapers. Keanu paused for a moment, taking it all in. New York City always felt alive, pulsing with stories waiting to unfold. He thought about his sister again, wondering what she would say if she could see him here now. Would she laugh at how much attention a simple necklace had brought? Or would she remind him that its value lay not in others' opinions but in the memories it held? Back on the plane, Sarah finished her post-flight duties and joined the other crew members in the galley. They chatted casually about the day's events, sharing jokes and comparing notes on difficult passengers. But Sarah kept quiet, her mind still processing the encounter with Keanu. One of her colleagues noticed her distant expression and asked, "Everything okay?" Sarah hesitated before answering. How could she explain what had happened without sounding defensive or self-pitying? In the end, she simply smiled and said, "Just thinking." The truth was, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Every detail of the interaction played back in her head, the sharpness of her own words, the calmness of Keanu's response, the awkward silence that followed. She wondered if she'd ever see him again, not because she wanted to apologize further, but because she wanted to thank him properly. Thank him for teaching her something important, that everyone carries unseen burdens, and judging them based on appearances only widens the gap between understanding and empathy. Later that evening, after the plane had been cleaned and prepped for its next journey, Sarah walked out of the airport and into the cool night air. The streets were quieter now, the chaos of the day giving way to a calmer rhythm. She pulled her jacket tighter around her and hailed a cab, climbing inside with a weary sigh. As the driver navigated through the city, she stared out the window, watching lights blur together in streaks of yellow and red. Her thoughts drifted back to Keanu's necklace, the unassuming piece of jewelry that had sparked such a profound chain of events. She remembered reading somewhere that Keanu often carried personal mementos with him, items that connected him to his past and the people he loved. At the time, she hadn't given it much thought, dismissing it as typical celebrity sentimentality. Now she understood differently. Objects like the necklace weren't just accessories, they were anchors, grounding their owners to moments and relationships that shaped who they were. Sarah realized then that she had judged Keanu not just for his choice of jewelry, but for qualities she assumed he lacked, qualities like humility, simplicity, and depth. And in doing so, she had revealed far more about herself than she cared to admit. By the time the cab reached her apartment building, Sarah felt emotionally drained, but oddly hopeful. She climbed the stairs to her floor and unlocked her door, stepping into the quiet sanctuary of her home. Dropping her bag on the couch, she wandered to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. Leaning against the counter, she closed her eyes and took a long sip, letting the cool liquid soothe her throat. For the first time all day, she allowed herself to reflect honestly on what she had learned. The biggest takeaway wasn't just about apologizing or owning up to mistakes. It was about perspective. People were more complex than they seemed at first glance, carrying layers of history and emotion beneath the surface. Sarah vowed to approach every passenger from now on with curiosity, rather than assumption, to listen instead of judge. It wouldn't be easy. Old habits died hard. But if Keanu could forgive her so readily, surely she owed it to herself, and to others, to try harder. Across town, Keanu settled into his hotel room, unpacking his belongings with deliberate care. The necklace went into a small dish on the bedside table, safe and visible. He glanced at it briefly before turning his attention to the view outside his window. The city skyline stretched out before him, glittering under the dark sky. Despite the noise and crowds, there was a certain magic to New York, a sense of possibility that never failed to inspire him. Tonight, though, his thoughts weren't on work or projects. They lingered on the flight attendant who had apologized sincerely, even after her initial misstep. Keanu admired her courage. Admitting fault wasn't easy, especially in front of someone you admired, or worse, envied. Yet Sarah had done exactly that, proving that growth often came from discomfort. He hoped she wouldn't dwell too much on the incident. Mistakes were part of being human, and forgiveness was a powerful tool, not just for healing wounds but for building bridges. As he turned off the lights and climbed into bed, he felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that today, two strangers had connected in a meaningful way. Sometimes, life's greatest lessons came wrapped in unexpected packages, even something as simple as a necklace. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. The sunlight streamed through her bedroom window, casting warm golden hues across the room. She stretched lazily, her mind already turning to the events of the previous day. It wasn't just the flight or Keanu's necklace that occupied her thoughts. It was the realization that people carried invisible stories, ones that couldn't be seen at first glance. That understanding had shifted something inside her, like a key unlocking a door she didn't know was closed. As she got ready for work, Sarah made a conscious decision to approach her job differently. Before, she had prided herself on professionalism, but now she saw that being professional meant more than just following rules or offering polite smiles. It meant seeing passengers as individuals, not just as customers paying for a service. She thought about how often she judged people based on their clothes, accessories, or behavior, without realizing it. Today she vowed to change that. If nothing else, the encounter with Keanu had taught her the importance of looking beyond appearances. At the airport, the usual chaos greeted her. Flight schedules flashing on screens, announcements echoing through the terminal, and travelers rushing to their gates. Sarah joined her colleagues in the briefing room, where they reviewed assignments for the day. Her name appeared next to another long-haul flight, this time heading overseas. The idea of spending hours in the air again should have felt exhausting, but instead, Sarah felt energized. Each passenger she met today would be an opportunity to practice what she'd learned, to listen, to empathize, and to connect. When boarding began, Sarah stood at the entrance of the plane, greeting passengers with genuine warmth. She smiled at families juggling children and carry-ons, nodded respectfully to business travelers buried in laptops, and exchanged light jokes with tourists, snapping photos of everything in sight. With each interaction, she reminded herself not to make assumptions. Just because someone wore designer clothes didn't mean they were confident. Just because someone seemed reserved didn't mean they weren't kind. Every person carried their own weight, their own struggles, and their own joys. Midway through the flight, Sarah found herself serving drinks in the economy section. A young mother struggled to calm her crying baby while balancing a diaper bag on her lap. Nearby, an elderly man fumbled with his seatbelt, clearly frustrated by its stubbornness. Sarah moved quickly to assist them both, her movements efficient but gentle. As she helped the mother adjust the bassinet and handed the elderly man a cup of tea, she noticed something: gratitude. Their expressions softened, and for a moment, the stress lines on their faces eased. It was a small thing, really, just basic kindness. But it mattered. Back in the galley, Sarah took a moment to breathe. She leaned against the counter, letting the hum of the engine soothe her. For years, she had viewed her role as purely transactional: provide food, drinks, and safety instructions, then move on. But today felt different. Today she saw herself as part of a larger experience, one that could shape how passengers remembered their journey. Whether it was helping a nervous flyer feel less anxious or simply offering a smile to someone having a bad day, every action counted. And though Keanu wasn't on this flight, his influence lingered in the way she approached her work. Meanwhile, across the country, Keanu was settling into a quiet rhythm in New York City. He spent his days exploring neighborhoods, visiting old haunts, and enjoying moments of solitude away from the spotlight. The silver necklace remained around his neck, a constant companion. Strangers occasionally recognized him on the street, asking for autographs or selfies. He obliged graciously, always making sure to thank them for their support. To him, fans weren't just admirers. They were people who shared pieces of their lives with his films, creating connections that went beyond fame. One afternoon, Keanu stopped by a small cafe in Brooklyn. The place was cozy with mismatched furniture and shelves lined with books. He ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching the world go by. A group of teenagers nearby whispered excitedly when they realized who he was, but they kept their distance, respecting his privacy. Keanu appreciated that. Fame had its perks, but moments like these, quiet, unassuming, and real, were what he cherished most. As he sipped his coffee, his thoughts drifted back to Sarah. He wondered how she was doing, whether the lesson from their encounter had stuck. Mistakes were inevitable, especially in high-pressure jobs like hers. What mattered was learning from them and growing stronger. Keanu hoped she wouldn't beat herself up too much over what had happened. Everyone stumbled sometimes. It was part of being human. What set people apart was how they picked themselves back up. Later that evening, Sarah returned home after her shift, physically tired but emotionally fulfilled. She kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto the couch, replaying snippets of the day in her mind. There had been challenges, of course: a delayed flight, a spilled drink, a cranky passenger, but none of it had shaken her resolve. Instead, she had focused on finding solutions, staying patient, and remembering that everyone aboard the plane had their own story. By the end of the flight, Several passengers had thanked her personally, their words lifting her spirits. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Sarah reflected on how much she had changed in just 2 days. The incident with Keanu had been uncomfortable and embarrassing, but it had also been transformative. She thought about the young mother with the crying baby, the elderly man struggling with his seatbelt, and even the cranky passenger who later apologized for snapping at her. Each of them had reminded her why she loved her job, not for the glamour or excitement, but for the chance to make a difference, however small. Across the miles separating them, neither Sarah nor Keanu knew how deeply their brief encounter had impacted the other. For Sarah, it had sparked a shift in perspective, teaching her to see people as more than their outward appearances. For Keanu, it had reinforced his belief in the power of forgiveness and understanding. Though their paths might never cross again, the ripple effects of their meeting continued to spread, touching lives in ways neither of them could fully comprehend. The world outside moved on, oblivious to the quiet transformations happening within. Planes soared overhead, carrying passengers to destinations unknown. Cities buzzed with activity, and strangers passed each other on streets without a second glance. Yet, amidst the noise and motion, moments of connection still managed to shine through. Moments like the one between a humble celebrity and a thoughtful flight attendant, bound together by a simple necklace and a shared humanity. A week had passed since the flight, and life for both Sarah and Keanu continued in its usual rhythm. Yet, the memory of their encounter lingered like a soft echo, shaping their actions and thoughts in subtle ways. For Sarah, each new day brought opportunities to practice what she had learned, to see beyond appearances and treat others with kindness no matter the circumstances. For Keanu, the experience reinforced his belief in the goodness of people, even when they stumbled or made mistakes. One morning, as Sarah prepared for another shift, she received an unexpected message from her supervisor. It was a short email, commending her for her recent performance, noting how passengers had praised her attentiveness and warmth. "Keep up the great work," it read. The words brought a smile to her face, not because of the recognition, but because they confirmed that her efforts were making a difference. She thought back to Keanu's forgiving smile and realized that his act of grace had planted a seed within her, a desire to be better, not just for herself, but for others. That same day, Keanu found himself at a park in Manhattan, enjoying the crisp autumn air. Leaves crunched underfoot as he walked along winding paths, watching children play and dogs chase after frisbees. He stopped by a bench and sat down, pulling out a notebook from his bag. Writing had always been a way for him to process emotions, to capture fleeting thoughts before they slipped away. Today he wrote about the flight attendant who had judged him, and then apologized sincerely. Her courage to admit fault stayed with him, reminding him of the importance of second chances. As he scribbled in the notebook, a young boy approached him shyly, clutching a movie poster featuring one of Keanu's films. "Excuse me," the boy said hesitantly. "Could you sign this?" Keanu smiled warmly and nodded, taking the pen offered by the child's mother. As he signed the poster, he asked the boy about his favorite scene from the movie. The boy's eyes lit up as he described it enthusiastically, his shyness melting away. Watching the boy's excitement, Keanu felt a familiar sense of gratitude, not just for the fans' admiration, but for the reminder that connections could happen anywhere, anytime. Back on the plane, Sarah navigated the aisles with practiced ease, balancing trays of food and drinks while engaging passengers with friendly conversation. One elderly woman traveling alone struck up a chat with her, sharing stories about her grandchildren and asking advice on navigating the airport after landing. Sarah listened patiently, offering tips and reassurance. When the woman thanked her warmly before disembarking, Sarah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. These moments, small yet meaningful, were why she loved her job. They reminded her that every interaction mattered, no matter how brief. Meanwhile, Keanu returned to Los Angeles a few days later, ready to dive into his next project. But even as he stepped back into the whirlwind of Hollywood, he carried the lessons of the past week. With him, fame often created barriers between celebrities and the rest of the world, but Keanu had always resisted those walls. He believed in staying grounded, in remembering where he came from and who he was beneath the spotlight. The silver necklace around his neck served as a constant reminder of that truth, a symbol of love, resilience, and humility. On her next flight, Sarah encountered another challenging situation. A passenger became visibly upset when informed that his preferred meal option wasn't available. Instead of reacting defensively, Sarah took a moment to listen. "I understand how frustrating that must be," she said gently. "Let's see if we can find something else you'll enjoy." Her calm demeanor diffused the tension, and by the end of the conversation, the passenger was apologizing for his initial reaction. Later, as she reflected on the exchange, Sarah realized how much she had grown. What once might have rattled her now felt like an opportunity to demonstrate patience and empathy. Days turned into weeks, and though Sarah and Keanu never crossed paths again, their lives remained intertwined through the ripple effects of their encounter. Sarah continued to approach her work with renewed dedication, striving to create positive experiences for everyone she met. Passengers began noticing the change in her demeanor, her genuine smiles, her willingness to go the extra mile, and responded in kind. Even her colleagues commented on her transformation, teasing her good-naturedly about her new superpower of turning grumpy travelers into happy ones. For Keanu, the memory of Sarah's apology served as a reminder of the power of forgiveness. In interviews and public appearances, he spoke often about the importance of compassion and understanding. "We're all human," he would say, his voice steady and sincere. "We make mistakes, and sometimes we hurt each other. But if we can choose kindness over judgment, we open the door to healing, for ourselves and for others." His words resonated deeply with fans, many of whom shared their own stories of forgiveness and growth inspired by his example. Months later, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey she had taken since that fateful flight. She had started out feeling embarrassed and unsure, burdened by guilt over a careless comment. But through Keanu's forgiveness, she had discovered a deeper purpose, one rooted in empathy and connection. She kept a small journal now, jotting down notes about interactions that stood out to her. The nervous teenager flying alone for the first time, the couple celebrating their anniversary, the weary traveler grateful for a listening ear. Each entry was a testament to the beauty of human connection, a reminder that everyone carried unseen stories worth hearing. And so, their lives moved forward separately but forever linked by a single moment high above the clouds. A flight attendant's mistake and a celebrity's act of grace had sparked a chain reaction, touching not only their own lives but also the lives of countless others. In a world often divided by differences, their story served as proof that understanding and forgiveness could bridge even the widest gaps. Whether aboard a plane soaring across continents or walking through the bustling streets of a city, the lesson remained the same. True worth isn't measured by appearances but by how we treat one another and ourselves.